Folks, we got people coming in right now. It's top of the hour, and we're just going to let people get in and get started probably within no more than a minute or so here. We just got folks coming in. I want to make sure that everybody can hear me. I'll just keep filibustering here just a minute so everybody can make sure you can see my lips moving and hopefully hear my voice as well. It is 3 o'clock Atlantic Daylight Time. As I was mentioning to our participants as we were chit-chatting pre-webinar here, I'm in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and discovered that a time zone exists that I barely knew even existed, the Atlantic time zone. Atlantic Daylight Time, where it is 3:01. We just clicked over to 3:01. Got a couple of people I still see coming in. And all right, looks like most people are in. We are gonna kick this off. Folks, my name is John Watson. I'm with the Evergreen Education Group. Gonna be hosting this discussion about reimagining schools for students and families seeking new options. I'm not gonna reread the description because probably you read it because you decided to show up today. But what I do want to point out is simply that we know that coming out of the pandemic, there are many, many parents and students who are showing interest in new schooling approaches, innovative models. We know, for instance, the National Parents Union has been running a series of polls. One of those polls, this is from a while back, but it showed by close to a 2-to-1 margin when parents were asked, did they prefer to go back to what was called the old approach of schooling pre-pandemic, or did they want to find something new? It was about a 2-to-1 margin that said they wanted something new. We also know that enrollments in online and hybrid schools have been up substantially. The number of parents choosing to go with homeschooling has been up. The number of students in private schools has been up as well. We are also now seeing public schools responding by providing new sets of options, online, hybrid, supplemental online courses, really a full range of options and opportunities for students. Here with me to talk about this topic and a little bit more about what they've been doing in their schools and at StrongMind. We've got Dan Milan of Valor Prep in Arizona, Nathan Gorsh of Village High School in Colorado, and from StrongMind, Giovanni Metcalf and Melissa Stone. As we get into this discussion, I'm going to be putting questions to each of them. I'll ask each of you to say a bit more. I know you've got more interesting backgrounds and experience that I just mentioned in that quick intro. So if you'd like to say a little bit more about StrongMind, Valor, Village, and your role and background there, certainly please do that. Also, I will encourage those of you who are joining us today to use the chat window and or the Q&A. Let us know what you're wondering about. We did get a question or two come in ahead of time that we will be addressing, but we'll be also watching the chat window to make sure that we are addressing your questions. So you can be sure if you put anything in there, we're gonna see it, and we will address it as well. All right, I'm gonna start this discussion with a question that's going to go to, in fact, both Dan and Nathan. I would love to have, and I'll start with Dan and then go to Nathan. Valor Prep and the Village both have their different models of hybrid. Dan, you've got the example from Valor. Would love to hear about that. Would love to hear a little bit also maybe about the evolution of what you saw in your previous position in the Ephrata, Pennsylvania school district. So let's start with you, Dan, and then Nathan, I'm going to put a version of that question to you as well, but let me start with Dan.
Sure. So this is my 31st year in education, and as you said, it began in Pennsylvania. I was a teacher for 18 years, and I had the opportunity to take over summer school, and was horrified that we were reteaching kids the same way we failed them. So that was 2007, and that began my process of kind of trying to revamp education. At a time in Pennsylvania, if you're not aware, the funding for cyber charter schools is pretty, what's a heavily debated topic about that. So it was pretty easy for me to see an inroad into making some changes in education. It began with the idea that, yeah, we needed to leverage kind of the promise of digital learning, which is formative assessments, teaching kids where they are, meeting them, and then using teachers to do what they do best, which is engage kids and not just hand out information. So back in 2007, I created a virtual school with the effort of Virtual Academy. And I did so. I moved, in case you're interested in this, I was a teacher, and how you move from teacher to admin without going through any of those other steps was I showed them the numbers. I said, you're losing $1 million per year, and it was growing at about 3% each year. And it was going to jump for more than that in the very near future. So I told them, if I win back, even a $300,000 of that, you can pay for me. We can keep our kids in school, and we can offer some pretty innovative programs. So I did that and created a virtual academy, which is a full-time cyber school. And I partnered with some of the bigger names in the business you would recognize. And that came from my first attempt to get teachers to build curriculum for to tune about $15,000 that my superintendent gave me as play money. And I immediately failed at that and realized that that was not going to work. So that's when I partnered with some of the other big names in the industry. And so we got that going. We won a bunch of kids back. I paid for the position. And then I opened up a school that ran from 8 a.m. to 8:30 at night to help students who are at risk, either a variety of reasons that would be. And it was a lab that ran in 4-hour shifts 4 times a day, and met with a learning coach, and we used teachers of record to keep that going. So, and that really that also helped kind of stabilize the position, and then allowed me to do some of the really fun stuff, which was create flexible learning cohorts within the schools and work on the concept of, why do kids have to leave in the first place, to get me involved, which is, why don't we make education just what it needs to be, which is, you don't have to be in front of the kids, in front of the classroom all the time, and leverage the promise of digital learning and, let teachers do, which is elevate relationships, elevate the learning into more competency-based and more application version of that. So that was Pennsylvania. By the time I left 2 Julys ago, I was offered the chance to come kind of put my money where my mouth was, which was I'll put up a school in Arizona using curriculum that was excellent curriculum. It's strong mind curriculum. But the most important part to me was, when I was running my flexible learning cohorts, we had to create all the curriculum again. We couldn't partner with somebody with that because that kind of flexible learning didn't exist. But Strong Mind had it. So the promise of coming out here to Arizona was that there are teacher lesson plans built into the Strong Mind lessons. So every time the teachers do something in our hybrid environment here, they have lessons that go with it that take them higher up on the TOK level, instead of just kind of getting the information out. So I'm now here in Arizona, long story short, and we run an 8 to 12 session for middle school kids. You have to be here Monday through Thursday. And in the afternoons, they can stay for tutoring. And then on Friday, it's open for just tutoring as well. And then high school comes from 12 to 4 for that same amount. So that's our version of hybrid. As you said, John, that there's no one version of hybrid, right? So what you're going to learn today about hybrid is that we did one model when we first got started, and now we're working on another one because we need to be able to adapt. So that's where we are right now.
Dan, before I go over to Nathan, I'm just going to mention that you must have seen that as quite the opportunity, given that you decided to move to Arizona in July.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it was not only move in July, it was also the heart of COVID. It had just come out. It was
perfect.
And it was there were a lot of downsides to leaving, but if I believed what I believed, then I had no choice. It was, my North Star was make education better for everybody. And this gives me a chance to show what we can do when given the opportunity.
Thanks, Dan. We're going to come back and dig into some of those things that you mentioned, because you mentioned about 5 things that I think are worth exploring further. Before we do that, Nathan, you've got a story with Village High School as well.
Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity. So I'm in Academy District 20 in Colorado Springs, which includes the Air Force Academy is in our school district of about 26,000 kids. But we had started an online school about 14 years ago through a Department of Defense grant which really was about the mobility of the military and being able to potentially have students stay enrolled in our district as they transition to other places. And so ran as an online school, completely online for about 7 years. And then I became the principal with really a vision that the power of online learning is not location, but the power of online learning is personalization. So how can we use online tools and curriculum to provide a meaningful, personalized experience for every student? So started with a pilot program with 25 ninth graders, and then added a grade every year to the place that we now have 410 kids, grades 9 through 12. They do some core classes online and then electives in person, really operate with more of a flexible schedule, more like a college, where we have 8 periods, but students take 4 of the 8 and then have flexibility over the rest of their time, can work on their own, can come in, meet with a teacher, be able to work independently. And it's really kind of morphed into catering to busy kids, athletes, actresses, musicians, students that have busy pursuits outside of school, along with students that really want to have a personalized experience. Maybe school is not engaging to them, it's going too slow, going too fast, and then students that want a smaller environment. Because the real key is we use online curriculum to free up staff to build deep, meaningful relationships with students, which maybe is the exact opposite of what some people think about when they think about online and blended schools. So that's kind of the quick version. I could talk a whole lot more, but try to save some thoughts for later.
Nathan, the way you describe students at the Village is so interesting to me, and it reminds me of when I had the pleasure of visiting your school and talking with some of the students. And the question I put to them that I think you overheard was, how many of your friends from outside the Village, how many students in the traditional high school do you think would do well at a school like Village High School that's got this kind of schedule? And what I heard from those students, and I've heard it from other similar schools, range from 50 to 110% was the answer.
Yeah, and I think that's fair and accurate, because one of the beauties of our school is instead of creating our model and then forcing kids into it, instead what we're able to do is adapt our model to what that kid needs. The real key though for us is that students have to be willing to be in the driver's seat, which I think reflects how many students are really willing to be in charge of their own experience instead of kind of being told what to do and when to do it, and all the structure that we build in our traditional systems. So it's probably a fair and accurate answer, because it may depend on who their friends are. Some of them, it might be 60% of their friends. Some of it might be 100%.
The other thing that I think I hear from those students is the idea that, well, 2 things really. One is that I do think there's a perception that, at least as a starting point, that schools like Village High School, like Valor, are really for a very small percentage of students. But in fact, the students pretty much consistently tell us, it's actually for a lot of students. And then the second thing is, after they've been there for even not very long, but a little bit, they start to get the perception of the idea that they have that level of control. They feel like is really a natural thing. And they see their friends who are not part of that school feeling like, yeah, these friends or siblings, cousins, et cetera, would do well in those situations as well. So what we've seen, and we can touch on this a little bit later when we talk about recruiting and retention and things like that, is just the way that so many students seem to respond to the approach of schools like Village High School over time in particular.
Yeah, my only thought to that, John, is what percentage of people is online banking effective for? We still have bank branches, right? There's times we still need to come in, we still need to sit down with someone, but the idea of using online tools for banking makes sense for all of us. So it really depends on the level of engagement. My brother's a banker, and when I took this job, he said, "Oh, so you're not even going to have real kids?" And I said, "Yeah, the same way that you don't have real money in your online bank." And he kind of got quiet quickly. I think it's a tool to be used effectively with a group of students, the same way that online banking has revolutionized the way that I manage my money.
Yeah, exactly. I love that analogy. Yvonne, I want to go to you, because Strong Mind over the last few years has really made a commitment to learning about, thinking about, and then supporting hybrid schools. And I wonder if you could talk about that journey.
Thank you, John. We have done quite a bit of research and development to go into our hybrid curriculum, designed specifically for schools that need the opportunity to be flexible, that need to be online, but also want to leverage the teacher relationships. I thought it was great that Nathan had mentioned that they use their online tools to free up teachers to build relationships. And that's what we saw. We saw many teachers who were being superheroes in the classroom in order to make that blended digital / face-to-face environment work. And what we wanted to do was create the opportunities to use a digital option when it made sense, and then also go deeper and go further with students one-on-one or in small group interactions by freeing up other things that teachers could do. And so that's been really important to us. And we've seen, and the learning about all of these online schools, or learning about all of these blended schools, that research has gone directly into our development and into our products. And we're happy to say that we were able to secure the Digital Promise Research-Based Design certification for our hybrid curriculum. But it looks so different in so many different settings, regardless of where, even if it's one product, regardless if it's Arizona or Ohio or California, the implementation is really customized and really important to be that it's responsive to the students in the community there.
I love what you're saying about relationships. Nathan was really explaining that. Dan touched on it as well. It is really something that we've seen in so many different hybrid schools, not just Village High School and Valor, but I've noted in a lot of these schools they put somebody in a very, very specific role, whether they call it a coach, a mentor, a facilitator, something that in a more traditional brick and mortar school, we often see teachers pick up, but not in a systemized way. And so what you have is in those more traditional schools, I think two things happen. First of all, you have some students who will fall through those cracks. Secondly, you have some teachers who are stepping up to really just an exceptional superhuman level of effort to really establish and maintain those relationships. And then the third thing is what we also hear when I've spoken with some of those teachers and with some of those schools is how they don't have the tools, the curriculum, the pieces to really systematize all that in their schools. So I love the way that StrongMind is thinking about all those issues.
Can I just add that one of the things that we came up with in our research over and over was this concept of learner variability. And we're all very familiar with the fact that students learn differently. Teachers teach differently. Teachers are prepared in different ways to go into a blended classroom, to go into a fully online classroom. And so that is something that we took into serious account, is having a set of tools that would be robust throughout the teacher's life cycle, throughout their needs, whether or not they need a lot of scaffolding or whether or not they need just a little bit to help free up their time.
Yeah, and it's been so interesting watching that StrongMind journey and how you've been thinking about all these elements and working with different schools. One of the things that I've seen StrongMind doing, I want to go back. I'm actually going to go to Nathan for this one. Nathan and Dan, you're both in schools that students choose, whether it's a charter school in the case of Valor, a district school in the case of Village. Nathan, I remember when on that visit, you told me how many students had not been enrolled in the district prior to enrolling in Village High School. And I wonder if you could talk about that and what that looks like in terms of getting the word out, the outreach that you do to students.
Sure. So we are 43% out of district. So 43% of our students do not live in the boundaries of our district. And if you were to look at a map of Colorado Springs, we actually draw students away from as far as an hour northeast of Colorado Springs, 45 minutes west of Colorado Springs, and then as far as half an hour south. So the students are drawn in from all over the area. I think a big piece of that is because we have a very unique model that really has a different focus than most other schools. So I said before, we've drawn in a lot of busy students. So one of the things we've done is partnered with some local organizations, whether that be the Youth Symphony, whether that be a hockey club, a baseball club, that those students really need a different model because they need the flexibility to be able to pursue those passions. And so ultimately tried to intentionally partner with them and bring some of those students in. One of my favorites is the hockey club actually has a bus that they bus kids in. So we actually have no busing in our school other than from the hockey rink that the hockey club actually buses those kids to us. So yeah, really have drawn a lot of students, and in Colorado, the money follows the kid. So obviously it brings in revenue to our district that wasn't there before.
You know, it's interesting. You referenced that map, and I'm reminded of there's some folks that we had at our Digital Learning Annual Conference doing a great presentation, and they're from something called the Map Academy in Massachusetts, and they love to tell this story. It's capital M, capital A, capital P, and they love to talk about how everybody thinks that's an acronym, and they say, no, it was a physical map, because that was a school. It's also a charter school that was essentially drawn up by the district, by district administrators, because they wanted to attract students back into school, primarily students who had dropped out or who were at risk of dropping out. And they literally had a map of where all these students were in the district. And so when you think about broadly bringing students back into the school, into the district, in some cases, like in that case, it's students who have dropped out. So there's this wide range from the types of students that you're talking about to students who may have dropped out, students who are looking for different opportunities as well. I see Denise's comment in the chat. We are watching, so please do let us know if you have any questions, whether they're generally about this topic or any specific questions for any of our participants. Dan, I'd love to hear from you what it's like talking with students and parents about this new kind of education, a hybrid school. What are those conversations like?
Yeah, I would say I would go back to the original. Pennsylvania was different as a traditional high school, or traditional district, I should say, of around 4,500, 4,700 students. Those conversations there were very different than they are here. So when I was in Pennsylvania, there was a traditional school and we were offering all these different options. I had to start at ground zero and explain why you would even consider doing such a thing. Like one of those deals where if it wasn't broke, why are we trying to fix it, right? When you look at the grand scheme of how we teach, it's broke in many ways. So, but here in Arizona, typically when parents come to us, they still don't know. They hear the word hybrid and they've been thrown off by pandemic hybrid, which is not an intentional approach at it. So, but rather kind of a survival mode, and a great job by everybody, but still survival mode for most people. But the way we approach it, I start with saying, just to be clear, we are intentionally hybrid, which means our entire instructional model, that thing behind my head, is built around the concept. The red is what online offers, and blue is what the humans offer, and that's the best way for me to describe it is, the being hybrid for us means that online gets to set the foundation for us and explain it to the parents. That sets the foundation, and we earn our flexibility, as you were saying, in Colorado. That online piece earns us the flexibility to be able to not just have to be in front of them all the time. And so we can get to the things that are in blue, which is those 21st century skills of collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and creative problem solving, and do some of the project work we have to do. So when I explain to them that for us, hybrid is not just about not being here. It's more about when you're here, it's very focused and very deep. And when you're not, you're getting a very robust curriculum, but you're getting setting foundation for that next day. And then the things we can offer you outside of that will depend on what you want out of this place. So we can offer a lot of different versions of what we currently do, but that our foundation is set by the online and built up by the humans involved.
I love the way that you're talking about the value of the online versus on-site, and how you think, and the team there thinks about, in a sense, the higher order, the more challenging concepts, and how they get addressed. First of all, in terms of, I mean, we know that math tends to be harder for a lot of students, right? So, and I don't know if this about Valor, but I know there's hybrid schools that really focus on bringing math on site, at least for a lot of students. And then the second piece is, and Yvonne mentioned this earlier, the variability among students and the ways that you can use hybrid to also just think about, okay, what does this specific student need, and can you bring that student in for some time? Or in the Valor model, I guess that student's gonna be there. So really focusing that time, and then the technology platform and course content also able to really pinpoint where that student's having some challenges, right?
Right. Yeah. And so our model is, yes, that one model I described where they come Monday through Thursday. You can opt into other models that we offer students, which is come in for one course at a time, or come in for tutoring, or for the check-ins with the teachers once a week to make sure the depth is happening at that time, that they need to check in on those options. So we don't have as many people choosing those other options because they need a piece of that. They know why they do it. And to your point, John, with the math, last year we were math every other day for students. That's what our version of the model was last year. And we, at the end of the year, because we've built an adaptable system, we asked, what would you like? And one of the answers, what would you change? And one was, we need math every day. We need to see that teacher every day. And so we adapted the system. So now we work on quarters where, for example, if you're a freshman, if you're a middle schooler, for this first quarter, you have social studies and math is going to go year round, and electives. Second quarter, you're going to have English, science, and math. And then third quarter, you go back to those other ones, so that we broke it up into that way. So the other critique or request they said was, don't give us all the courses at once. It's just too much between doing the online and the face-to-face. So we just adapted. And like you said, the one thing they said was math. Get back to we need more.
Yeah. And just again, that ability at a school level, at a systems level, to be able to target those needs is so valuable. We got a question that came in, which I'm gonna get to in a second. But before I want to do that, I want to go to Melissa, because we've been talking a little bit in this discussion, this last round with Dan and Nathan, just about that outreach to students and families. And Melissa, I know that's something that Strongmind has thought about as well. Sometimes it's not something that comes naturally to a lot of educators that I've known. So I wonder if you could talk about that, and then we're going to get back to this question that Bernie Thomas asked.
Sure, thanks, John. It's always so great to hear Dan and Nathan and Yvonne talk about. I learn so much every time, and new concepts and new things that are coming up. But being at Strongmind has been a really great experience for me. After being at a bunch of different vendors over the years, but Strongmind really is student and teacher centered, and giving opportunities to help schools and partner and customize with whatever problems schools are trying to solve. So one thing we've really invested a lot in is building community support and engagement, and we can really customize that to help schools create their own voice, get their own story out. So we do a variety of things to help tell their story, and it can be promotional activities, it can be websites, it can also be parent and student events. So really just once we sit down with the school and talk about their goals and needs, we can really customize that offering, and helping get people excited, bring some PR in, and also build that community to help retain students. So it's just working hand in hand with districts. Marketing isn't a very popular word with schools, right? And but this really isn't marketing as much as helping you build community, build support, and tell your story. So we really enjoy working with schools and programs to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting to think about what does marketing mean, and I think in the best sense, it means making sure that the starting point is that whatever field you're in, you know what your customers, in this case, students and families, want, and you're making sure that you are providing that. And of course, those are really valuable things to think about, especially in this. I wish I still start to say post-pandemic. We're clearly not post-pandemic as much as I would. I wish we were. Nathan, before we get back to this question, then I'm going to pitch over to Yvonne about the strong mind model of hybrid. Can you talk about what you've called push and pull factors? Because I think it fits into this discussion really, really well.
Sure. So I'm a recovering geography teacher. And so one of the concepts in geography, when you think about movement of people, is push factors and pull factors. What I mean by that is if you move across the country, there may be things that push you out of the place you were, and then perhaps things in the new place that pull you in. So Dan, I think of you, the weather in Pennsylvania in the winter, probably not as nice as it is in Arizona, right?
Oh my, no.
Yes. So what we really kind of frame is this same idea. I'm afraid when you first create an online or a blended program, what you're going to find is a lot of students coming for push factors. Something does not work for them in their traditional experience. And ultimately they're looking for something new that may or may not be a good reason. If I had $1 for every parent that sat in front of me and said, nothing else has worked, so let's just give this a shot, I'd probably be on a beach right now. And what we did here is really intentionally say, all right, we still want a place for those push factors, but what if we created an attractive model? What if we really looked at how to pull kids in? And then really designed our model around what is it, to your point, John, what is it that our market or our community is really seeking in a school that's not being met, which for us was really around flexibility and around this unique elective experience that students do in person that's very different than any other school in our area. And so what we found is we quickly moved our clientele from this push factor into this pull factor, which then of course created a new culture, a lot more student success when they were choosing us for different reasons.
I love doing webinars because I always hear something that I haven't heard before. And Nathan, even though you and I have talked a lot, I don't think I've ever heard you put it that way. And in fact, I love that so much that I'm going to ping you after this to see if you might like to write a blog post for our Digital Learning Collaborative site, because I love that framing for sure. So I want to go back to the question now that Bernie Thomas asked, and he said hybrid during the pandemic was a substandard experience for teachers and students. And yes, it was for most. Dan mentioned a lot of heroic efforts from teachers, from families, from school and district leaders. But a lot of times the best option out there was room and Zoom, teachers simultaneously teaching students in the classroom and over Zoom as well. And lots of evidence that didn't work well at all for anybody. And we are very much talking about hybrid that is not pandemic room and Zoom. So Yvonne, I'd like to kick this question over to you because the question was specifically, what is StrongMind's model of hybrid? I suspect you're gonna have an answer to that we'd like to hear.
Thanks. And before I try to describe our model, not trying to cop out of describing a formula or a specific a set of factors that have to exist in order to be StrongMind's model, but we actually did study schools across the country in order to identify what to boil down the essence of what would be needed by a hybrid school. And the two things we saw, and this was pre-pandemic, mind you, so all of these schools were intentionally creating these different options for students that could flex between the online and in-person or face-to-face environment. I'm going to stop referring to it as in-person because the face-to-face interaction like this is just as valuable. But what we did find was the assumptions had to be met that there will always be a group of students who are going to need things in different ways, and there will always be a set of teachers who are there to respond to those needs that simply that the computer or the product itself cannot. And we need to support both of those experiences, and it needs to be driven by data. So all of the online factors, all of the online learning techniques that have been proven to be good pedagogy are there, but what we've also built are a set of assumptions that teachers are going to want to use this online or offline, and therefore any offline materials need to be available and need to be easily customizable to small group instruction, one-on-one instruction, and also large group instruction. And so we've built all of that into the tools to make the lift easier for teachers to be able to run an effective online or offline or hybrid classroom without having to stay up all night to prep, without having to grade papers all night. Data needs to be readily available to them in order to inform the instruction that they're going to be very intentional about, because the face-to-face time is so important, and it is going to be more limited given that students are doing a lot of the work online.
Yvonne, I'm going to go back to you for another question that had come in during the registration process. I want to before I do that, just touch on what you just said, because I think it's so valuable. What I see StrongMind doing, and in a way, I'm just echoing what you said, but I think it's so valuable. What I see StrongMind doing is saying, look, we don't have one instructional model for hybrid. What we see are these elements of successful instruction in different hybrid models, and we can support them in these variety of ways, and then some of those commonalities that you touched on. And I think that's so critical, because as you touched on, you in the research that you did, and we did some of this exploration with you, there are so many different approaches out there. For instance, we always, and I know you do too, get just asked the simple question of, hey, what's the schedule? You know, what's the schedule? Like there's one schedule, but we know there isn't one schedule. There's hybrid schools have a lot of different approaches, whether it's a model that says students are going to be coming in on different days and everybody's coming in on those different days. At another extreme, if you look at the California Independent Study schools that are running on hybrid, their approach only necessarily calls for a student being face-to-face 1 hour per week. And a lot of those schools will have students come in more if they determine they need it. So I love the way you frame that. Let me go on to the other question that came in, which is about how StrongMind thinks about bilingual education. And that was the extent of the question. It was from somebody who is in Texas. So maybe we can assume there's a decent, I wouldn't want to assume, there's a decent chance that's about Spanish, but certainly not necessarily. It's not like Spanish and English are the only languages in Texas. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that from a StrongMind perspective.
So the instruction is written and authored in English, the online instruction. In some states that is fine, that is actually required, and in others, the instruction is required to be translated. And so we implement a variety of tools in schools to make sure that we can support students. In regards to whether or not they're English language learners, whether or not they're bilingual students, or students who are learning to be bilingual. There's Google Translate, there's Authenticate. There are so many widgets now that really enable us to do so many more things, which is the beauty of this blended learning approach. What I want to say is that there are a lot of really important ways that online is different from face-to-face. For example, using Authenticate to ensure that the student wrote the piece of work. And yes, you can say, well, I want you to respond to this discussion board in Spanish. We'll assume Spanish, or I want you to, or let's turn on the little button that translate all of this text into Cantonese, if that's the language that students are learning. But there needs to be a balance to that, because students need to be able to speak, but they also need to be able to demonstrate the learning in the way that it's going to be assessed. And in a lot of ways, that is going to be at the end of the school year, at least in grades 3 through 8, and then at least once in high school, it will be in English on a high stakes state assessment. And yes, those haven't been around as much in the past couple of years, but with the combination of tools and the combination of face-to-face, bilingual instruction is completely possible in a hybrid environment. It just takes intentional planning, just like any successful hybrid program that is not necessarily a crisis response program. I think that is the main differentiator between an effective hybrid or blended school versus a crisis response online school. And so whether or not it's technology makes everything possible. And whether or not it's in Cantonese or Spanish or English, that is all possible. It just takes more planning on the school's part. And as Melissa said, we have a variety of support services available to help people think through that. For example, Dan mentioned that his school changed models from year to year in response to the academic needs or the community needs, or because Dan's school needed to scale. In those same ways, we supported Dan in those transition years and have been able to successfully meet the needs of his students and Dan.
All great points. As you were talking also, we got a follow-up from Bernie to your earlier question, and I'm going to address that, and then I wonder if either Dan or Nathan wants to touch on this as well. So Bernie talked about the teachers expressing the impossibility of face-to-face while simultaneously being online, and most of the hybrid schools that I know of literally never do that. And I don't know if either Dan or Nathan schools ever do that, but that is one distinction, that the hybrid schools are splitting those two modes of instruction, as Dan talked about earlier, really making sure that there are certain things that are done online, certain things that are done face-to-face, and being really thoughtful about those things. So it's never those two things together. The other piece too, Bernie mentions the at-home issues. The student and family support is always so critical when there's an online component, even just the thoughtfulness of what does that home or non-school environment look like? And it's one of the elements of both online schools and now hybrid schools put a lot of thought into. Dan, you're unmuted, so I'm going to take that as you'd like to comment on this.
I stayed unmuted, yeah, sure. But yes, I would love to. And Bernie, I will tell you, life being the great experience, it taught me a lot even last year, because I just started in July when the pandemic hit. So I ran the 2 lanes in our hybrid. I chose to run those 2 lanes, teaching face-to-face and at home at the same time. That's a bad idea, in my opinion. It was a bad idea that needed adapted and changed. It didn't. You lose both fights, in my opinion, in that way. And Bernie, I don't think there's a good solution out there. I think the question is probably the question I should have asked is, what is the best setup for everybody involved, and not what's going to satisfy the people who want to be face-to-face. So I think with the essence of a flexible learning environment and hybrid, which is, to me, they are synonymous, is that you survey what people need and what the requirements are, and then you come up with, you design thinking your way through it. Like, take everybody's perspective and say, what is the best way to get through this? In my opinion, the being online and being face-to-face at the same time is not an effective solution. And I would give you an example of why it doesn't work. Is when I was in Pennsylvania traditional school, we were trying to show people that we could run a blended learning. At the time, that was just a simple 3-station rotation with technology. And one of them, I ran a guiding coalition of teachers. And for a full year, we had them meet. We met twice a month, had them implement those strategies. And at the end, we got to about 3/4 way through the year, and we had taken them to different workshops and read books and that kind of thing. And what they did was, as teachers, they were looking for a new box to get inside of. And they learned how to do 3-station rotation with technology, and we built the technology. And what was frustrating to me was that I realized at that moment is if we create a new box that doesn't take the learner and the teachers into consideration when building that new box, then we've already gone backwards in our motion. That when we do hybrid, we're not doing this to create a new box. We're creating an adaptable box that when we learn new things, we adapt to those ideas and change with them. I personally will never go back to a face-to-face and online at the same time. It's just not a functioning system. And you know, I've learned that, and so our system now reflects all the elements that we need for this year. And I intend, as we go through this year, next year, to adapt again, depending on what we need in this area.
Dan, two things that come to mind as you were talking. First of all, we talk about a lot about how Room and Zoom was bad for teachers. There's a lot of evidence it was bad for students too. Some really interesting stories about students saying, hey, I went back to have this good in-class experience, and it actually wasn't very good, starting with there were only 5 kids in class. And you know, it was clear the teacher couldn't really focus on us. Second thing, more broadly, you touched on this, just the idea that the hybrid schools really have to have teachers who are bought in and truly have this growth mindset. You know, we talked about growth mindset for students, right? But I have never seen a hybrid school that didn't have a growth mindset within all the teachers as well. For the reason you're talking about, it's not like, hey, here's the box, go draw, go color within the lines, right? It's go figure out the lines. Nathan, you're unmuted now. I'm taking that as you're interested in piping in.
Yeah, I do have some thoughts. So to start with, I think the framework we took is we took a traditional teaching model and just tried to broadcast it and move it online. So we actually didn't move learning online, we moved teaching online through the synchronous platform. I think that really what we need to be doing is thinking asynchronous, that students can work on their own. So the way we've got it set up here is that students work through the content on their own individually, but then there's office hours for them to be able to sit down with the teacher, where then we can personalize intervention and instruction to whatever that student doesn't understand. There's no way we could do that though if my teachers were having to create a synchronous lesson and then provide intervention. Again, we pinch ourselves with time, and it just wouldn't be able to work that way. So we actually use it to free up time. The other piece, and John, you mentioned about staff. I think that there's a lot of teachers in our traditional schools that are bored. They teach the same lesson potentially 4 or 5 times a day. They may mix it up here and there. 4th period might be a touch different than 3rd period. And what we've been able to do here is, because we're able to use the online tools, it frees up teachers again to be able to meet students at an individual level, but to actually go deeper in those conversations, whether it be with an individual kid or with a concept. We're not going to be able to create more time. Our time is a limited variable, but we need to be able to think about how we use our time to then be able to provide teachers the opportunity to use that time differently with students, which then kind of feeds their soul, which then makes them happy. It's this vicious cycle that we're either kind of cycling down or cycling up.
Agreed. Related to a point that both especially going back to some of the things that Dan said, but I want to actually go back to Yvonne and the students. I just noted we lost Dan, but I was going to take this to Yvonne. Yvonne, I wonder if you can talk about the resources that StrongMind has developed for learning coaches and what that means, just as part of the way that a hybrid or an online school is really thinking about that non-school learning environment.
Sure, thanks, John. And I hope Dan comes back. I hope he's okay. But we've developed quite a few parent/learning coach resources, and we're referring to it as learning coach resources because it's not always a parent. Sometimes especially having been in online virtual learning for quite some time, we know that sometimes it's a grandparent, sometimes it's a foster parent. But we try to support the learning coach and let them know that this asynchronous time that Nathan just referred to is actually very important. It's actually a very important time for students to get uncomfortable and start creating those pathways, those cognitive pathways that didn't already exist. And so what we've seen is people struggling with seeing that struggle and wanting to jump in and help. And so we've developed a lot of resources to keep parents and learning coaches informed of their students' progress, even on a daily basis, but then also letting them know what is going to happen throughout the day, what they need to do, what their student should do, and especially what their student is going to experience. So that way they get more comfortable with the cognitive training process that's happening for their students.
And I think it's so important the way Strongmind is thinking about this, and the experience schools as well, because it is so overlooked. Just the idea at the question that Bernie mentioned, it was this question of, hey, what does that look like with siblings and distractions? And so much of that is fairly easy, but maybe not if you've never thought about it before. We have about 7 minutes left, not a lot of time. So I'm mentioning that for two reasons. For anybody who wants to get a question in, now is definitely the time. Where I've got way too many questions that I'd love to touch on, but we are gonna end on time. Welcome back, Dan. Glad that you're able to rejoin us. I wanna ask briefly about SEL. I wanna make sure we have time for everybody for a very quick lightning round question to just have everybody leave our audience with one thought. So I'm going to start with SEL. We'll either fit in one additional question and or go straight to the lightning round question. Yvonne, I know I just asked you the previous question, but I want to go back to you anyway, because I know you've been thinking about SEL, and then Dan and Nathan, if you could touch on either SEL, either narrowly in terms of how you were thinking about all SEL related issues during the pandemic, or more broadly if you'd like to do that as well. But let me start with Yvonne.
Thanks, John. So social and emotional learning is similarly one of those things that can be easily overlooked in any academic environment. But what we're seeing is that students, especially who are spending time asynchronously learning, independent learning, need additional support, and it needs to be explicit and it needs to be integrated and relevant. And so what we sought to do was infuse the social and emotional learning practice that they would have if they were in a classroom with their teacher or responding to a peer there in the online environment, just to keep them connected, just to keep them practicing and mindful of the tools and the skills they're going to need to apply when they actually go and they face their teacher, when they're interacting with their peers at the end of the day or for that 1 hour of the day, just to keep those tools sharp, because they are extremely important in being able to demonstrate anything you learn that day. Any of the academic skills that the student learns is going to need to be demonstrated with social and emotional intention.
Nathan, social emotional learning during a pandemic, what'd that look like?
So we have an amazing culture where our staff and students really stand shoulder to shoulder. And that was really hard during the pandemic. The tools were there. It was pretty easy to move the learning into a remote or an online environment, but that culture piece was really difficult. But one of the things we do is we have a mentorship program. So every student here picks one of the adults that they say, hey, you're my person. And so we really take a small school and make it even smaller. It's really fun. Every fall we do this matchmaking where students request their first 3 choices, and then we try to give them either their first or second choice. And so then as an adult, I'm looking at it, this kid picked me. And so my first question is, why did they pick me and what do they need from me? And so then some meet once a week, some meet every other week, but it's really an intentional relationship that kid has one adult in our building that is their go-to. We also have counselors. We also have some other academic support folks, but we really double and triple team that student service model to make sure there's multiple adults, but that mentor piece is huge. And it's really a very special relationship between a staff and a student. In fact, my children go to my school. Sometimes they ask me questions and I'm like, go talk to your mentor. That's your go-to because it's a really important relationship here.
Back to all about relationships, like you were saying earlier. Dan, SEL in the desert.
Same kind of, it's very similar to what Nathan said. We actually are a very small ship here. So I moved from a large district to this. We're about 130 right now. So we do not have lots of counselors, psychologists. We don't have all that. So, well, we did have to assign mentors, as you said, like each student has a mentor. And we did use the strong-minded curriculum. And for us, the most important thing was a foundational language, the same vocabulary that everyone was using. And so when we were looking at how to use strong-minded, that was my primary goal, to be able to get a language that everybody spoke together. And when they spoke, that it all meant similar things. Because when coming at it from those just challenging emotional spots, one word can mean something entirely different to 12 different people. So, but when you start getting a same framework and a same language, then we can all build at the same spot. So that's why it was so important for us to get that foundational piece together, and that's how we used it.
I love that point about a word can mean so many different things to different people. So true, so valuable. All right, we are just about out of time. I could listen to all of you for another hour, but I'd like to honor our planned time and your busy schedule. So we're going to close with a lightning round, 30 seconds on what you would like to leave our attendees with. And we're going to put up contact information while we're going through the lightning round. Melissa, 30 seconds or less on what you'd like to leave our attendees with.
Sure. Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for coming, and all the panelists. I enjoyed this time very much, and continue to learn from everyone, which is great. But just in closing, from our viewpoint, we do have a lot of products and solutions offerings here at Strong Mind, as well as dedicated people that would love to have a conversation and help you and add value in any way we can. So there's my contact information. Would love to have a conversation about anything, and even if it's just helping you go through your needs and problems and problem solve, and get some goals and directives down, and help alignment in your strategy and planning. We would love to be a part of that. And if we have some solutions that would help, of course, we would love to do that also.
Thank you, Melissa. Dan, going to you next. Lightning round. What do you want to leave everybody with?
Great. That this is a unique opportunity to become the solution person in your district or your area. Like this is a time when people are looking for answers and not always asking the right questions. So you have a unique opportunity right now to say there are solutions out there, whether it's the SEL piece and quite honestly, you're looking to leverage the power of your teachers, then hybrid is the way to do that. If you're looking to leverage the use of technology, then these hybrid pieces are the way to do that. You become the idea person and the solution person for your district or school, and really help kids out and help your district out as well.
Thank you, Dan. Nathan.
Yeah, I really think that point about teachers is important, because we're either going to add more to a teacher's plate, or we're going to be able to take things off of a teacher's plate using digital tools. And I just would challenge all the leaders on this webinar to really think about the decisions that they make. Are they adding more to a teacher's plate, or are they freeing them up? I think we're almost to the point of crisis around teachers. A survey came out that 40% of teachers in Colorado have thought about leaving in the last year, which I think is going to be a whole different challenge if we're not careful. So how can we use digital tools to free teachers up to get back to what's important to them, which is building relationships with students?
Love it. Thank you, Nathan. Yvonne, last word.
Blended learning does not mean a free-for-all in mode or medium. It has to be intentional. It has to be planned. And there's a very big difference between setting out to do it and then being forced to do it. And change management is always difficult, especially in education. Change management is a huge issue. But to Melissa's point, there are resources, and to Nathan's point, there are resources out there to help you along that evolution, because it is a matter of, are we going to make things scalable and sustainable, or are we going to burn out our teachers and our students?
Agreed. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks, Yvonne. Thanks, Melissa, Dan, Nathan. You were all fantastic. I could listen for another hour. As I said, for folks who are listening, you've got the contact information in front of you. If you've got any questions for anybody, please do let us know. And with that, thanks again. Signing off from Atlantic Daylight Time here in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I hope to see you all online again soon. Bye.